Hi, my name is Gail Janisek, and I'm the park interpreter at Fall River Heritage State Park. Fall River Heritage State Park is owned and managed by the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department of Conservation and Recreation. So this department manages the park's beaches and watersheds of the state. Today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the animals that make their home at Fall River Heritage State Park. The park is actually a unique property. Although located right in the middle of Fall River, it's also found at the intersection of the Quequechan and Taunton River. The Quequechan River is a freshwater river, and the Taunton is actually considered salt water, as it's located right at the mouth of the river is located right at Mount Hope Bay. So the first 18 miles or so are considered salt water. When you add in the cultivated landscape of the park, it creates an area that's unique, and it provides housing for a lot of different animals. We're going to talk about some of those animals today. Some of these animals are visible in the park year-round. Some of them are only seen seasonally. So when you visit, keep your eyes open. The first animal that we're going to talk about today is actually the largest rodent found in Massachusetts. We're going to talk a little bit about an animal that you may know as the woodchuck or the groundhog. A lot of people are familiar with Groundhog Day in early February and the myth around whether the woodchuck that wakes up sees its shadow or doesn't see its shadow. So there's a little bit of creative storytelling associated with that, but the interesting factual part of the story is that woodchucks are one of our true hibernators that are found in Massachusetts. And what this means is that the woodchucks are active during the warm part of the year, and then in the fall they feed up, so they eat a lot of plants and fruits and things like nuts. They gain weight, and then as the days get shorter, they actually go to sleep for the cold season. When they enter hibernation, their body temperature drops and their respiration rate slows. And that's what designates a true hibernator versus some animals that live in our area that just go through short periods of sleep in the cold weather. So I mentioned that the woodchuck or the groundhog is a rodent, and they actually are in the ground squirrel family. If you can imagine a 5 to 10 pound squirrel, that's what a woodchuck is. They are plant eaters and can sometimes be found on the lawn areas of the park. They like edges and grasslands. And as you go throughout the greater Fall River area, it's pretty common to see woodchucks along the side of the highway or on median strips. You'll often see them standing, looking around, getting a good view of the area. They are a rather large rodent, and they're grizzled in appearance. I keep using the word rodent, and people often ask me, what does that mean? Rodents are mammals that have incisors, or the teeth located in the center of the mouth, right here. Their incisors grow throughout their lifetime. They usually have pretty impressive large incisors too, all the rodents, but they must chew throughout their lifetime to wear down their teeth. If they don't wear their teeth down, they can actually overgrow to the point where the rodents can no longer eat food. So that can become a dangerous situation for them. Fortunately, as the rodents chew, the top teeth wear against the edge of the bottom teeth. So a healthy rodent or woodchuck usually does well in this area. Another one of the popular animals that we see in the park that are really easy to find because of their large size and white color are the mute swans. They're very popular residents in the park. They're often here in the spring, and we have a pair, a male and a female, that usually raise a brood right along the back side of the carousel. They're very popular animals because they're very attractive, and lots of folks are surprised to learn that they're not native to North America. Mute swans were actually introduced to the east coast of the United States in the late 1800s and early 1900s. City fathers and large property owners thought they beautified private estates and parks, so they actually imported them and released them into the wild. So that's how they became more populous, as they escaped these estates and parks. And they're now pretty common in wetlands, both in Massachusetts and all along the East Coast. Originally, they're from Europe, so they were introduced from Europe. They are a very large animal. Mute swans can weigh up to 25 pounds, and that does make them the largest waterfowl that you'll see in this area. Due to their large size and their territorial nature, they can actually drive out lots of smaller native waterfowl when they're nesting in an area. One of the interesting things about swans, we like to say they come with their own vocabulary. A male swan is called a cob, C-O-B. A female swan is called a pen, P-E-N. And young swans are called cygnets, C-Y-G-N-E-T. So they have their own vocabulary. They are largely vegetarian, and you will see our adult pair with their youngsters feeding in and along the waterways, again, usually right along the intersection of the Quequechan and the Taunton River. Again, very attractive. Even though they're called mute swans, they do make some noises. All swans hiss when they're irritated. So hopefully you won't be hearing that noise when you're visiting in the park. Another waterfowl that you may see that's often confused with ducks is the double-crested cormorant. They're distinctive in that they ride very low in the water, and you often see just their neck and their head. Sometimes people also misidentify them as loons, because loons also tend to ride sort of low in the water. Cormorants, however, are not very closely related to ducks. They're more closely related to birds called gannets and boobies. These guys are definitely carnivores. They're big-time fish eaters. And when you visit the park, as you walk along the boardwalk or as you cross the footbridge, keep an eye out for them. You'll often see them diving, and then they rise up from the water with a fish that they then toss up into the air and catch head first, that they swallow whole. They are different from ducks in several ways, one of which is that they really don't waterproof their feathers. So it's pretty common to see the double-crested cormorants around platforms in the water or right at the water's edge on rocks, with their wings outspread, drying their bodies and their wings. Ducks and most other waterfowl will actually oil their feathers with an oil that their body produces, and their feathers repel water. That's not the case with the double-crested cormorant. They also have really neat beaks. They have a serrated edge, almost like a knife. Because they're fish eaters and fish are slippery, the serrated edge helps them grab and hold on to the fish that they catch. If you're fortunate enough to get a good view of one through the viewers that are on the back deck of the visitor center, you might be surprised to see this dark bird has bright orange skin patches around its face, and has a bright blue eye and a bright blue lining to its mouth. So what seems to be a sort of dark, nondescript bird is actually kind of striking when you get a good close-up view. One of the other animals that we're going to talk about has a really interesting story, but they are a little difficult to see in the park. Many visitors aren't aware that the Taunton River system is the largest herring run in the state of Massachusetts and one of the largest herring runs on the East Coast. River herring, which are the two species of fish known as alewife and blueback herring, migrate from salt water up the Taunton River each spring by the tens of thousands. These fish go into smaller streams and some eventually go into ponds further up the Taunton River and lay their eggs. After they lay their eggs, they return to the Taunton River and go back out to sea. So alewife and the blueback herring are actual multiple year spawners. So they'll make that journey several years, laying eggs each time. On years when the population is high, we often see the young fish towards the end of the summer season in and around the mouth of the Quequechan as the young fish are headed back out to sea. Because the Taunton River is so deep here, we tend not to see the fish right at the surface of the water. But in shallower streams further upstream in the Taunton, you can actually see the fish jumping and moving through the current, going against the current to get to the place where they hatched to lay their own eggs. We have another fish who does the opposite of the river herring, and it is known as the American eel. The American eel spends most of its life in fresh water and then migrates down the Taunton River, out Mount Hope Bay, and out to the sea to lay its eggs. So we have fish going in opposite directions on the Taunton River. We often do see eel both in the Quequechan and in the Taunton. Lots of folks actually think eels are snakes. They are not. They're a very slim, bony fish, so they actually belong in the fish group. An animal that you'll see in and around the water, and you almost always see this animal either in the water or right at the water's edge, is a mammal known as the American mink. This is an animal in the weasel family, and they have beautiful glossy guard hairs, which they do oil, and that actually keeps their undercoat dry as they go in and out of the water. They are true carnivores, and they have a lot of flexibility in what they eat. Literally, they will eat whatever they can catch. So that can include fish, clams, birds, nestlings, eggs, large insects, young rabbits, rodents, and pretty much anything else that moves. They're very quick and very good hunters. When we see them here in the park, we do see them in the water or right at the water's edge. The American mink is related to a larger weasel that we also do sometimes see in the park, the river otters. So every once in a while we do see a river otter. I have to admit, one of my favorite animals that we do see in the water here is the blue crab. Blue crabs spend winter out in the ocean, and as the waters warm in ponds, coastal ponds, and in streams, they have a high tolerance for variable salinity. So the blue crabs will actually move into rivers and streams in the summer. They're a very easy animal to identify due to the blue coloring that they have on their legs. So that's really the only crab that you're going to see in our area that has some blue on its ectoskeleton. Another really easy way to identify them is when you look at the back legs on their body, they're actually modified and they're called swimmerets. And that actually allows blue crabs to go up and down in the water column. They do belong to a group of crabs known as swimming crabs. All the other crabs that we have in our area are actually walking crabs, and they utilize the habitat of beach areas and stream bottoms. But the blue crabs, because of their ability to swim, are kind of like the tigers of the estuary. They actively hunt living animals, even other blue crabs, which is kind of an interesting situation. It is pretty easy to tell male blue crabs from female blue crabs. When you look at the underside of the crab's body, they have a piece of cartilage that wraps around that actually looks like a tail. So on the bottom of the crab's body, if it's long and thin, that's a male crab. If it's broad, it's actually a female crab. Female blue crabs also have a tendency to have red pincher tips. So their pinchers tend to be red. We say they have red nail polish, the female crabs. We have a very interesting phenomenon that happens in the park towards the end of July and the beginning of August. We do have the habitat that supports annual cicada. So the cicada is an insect that spends most of its life underground. And for the last few weeks of its life, it actually climbs up out of the ground, climbs up a tree, and does its final shed, in which it becomes a winged adult. So if you think about mid to late summer, we often hear this constant buzz from the trees. So I always associate it with hot, humid days, because that's what our days tend to be like here in Fall River at the end of the summer. But annual cicadas can be found all around the greater Fall River area. We have a certain habitat here that also supports an insect called the eastern cicada killer, or the cicada hawk. These two insects have evolved very closely together. So their life cycles sync up very closely. Once the cicadas start hatching, we start seeing the cicada killers also coming into their adult forms. And the reason that they're called cicada killers or cicada hawks is because that's what they eat. That's the only thing they eat. And if you can, a lot of folks do know when they see a photo of a cicada, they recognize, oh yeah, I see those. I see them towards the end of the summer. A cicada is a rather large insect. The cicada hawk is a very large wasp. So one of the reasons we're a good habitat for the cicada hawks is not just that we have cicadas, because they're all over the place, but we have a very sunny exposure here at the Heritage Park. And we have soil that's sandy, and it's easy for the cicada hawks to actually dig their burrows, which is where they lay their eggs. That's also where they take the cicadas that they catch. So a cicada hawk will catch a cicada. They actually sting it, and the sting paralyzes the cicada. The wasp then buries the living cicada in a nest chamber. And when the wasp's eggs hatch, they then eat the cicada. So it's a fascinating life story and cycle, and it's actually something you can witness firsthand when you come here and visit the park end of July, beginning of August. Listen for the cicadas. If you hear the cicadas, start looking for a really large wasp flying around. The wasps usually aren't interested in us. The males can be territorial, so you might get one that starts to chase you, but the males don't have the ability to sting. So that's kind of interesting. The females can sting, but they'll really only sting to defend their nest chamber, or, again, unless you're a cicada, they'll sting you. So that's a little drama in real life that you can look for when you're visiting the park towards the end of the summer. My talk about animals in the park wouldn't be complete about some favorites that you can see here almost year-round. The eastern gray squirrel is a tree squirrel, much smaller than our ground squirrel, the woodchuck, that's found in and throughout the park. They are primarily vegetarians. They eat a lot. Everybody knows gray squirrels and acorns. They love their nuts. And if you watch in the fall, you will see eastern gray squirrels digging holes and storing nuts for the winter. But they also do eat things like fruit, insects, and believe it or not, they like to eat birds' eggs and nestlings, bird nestlings. So yeah, it's kind of interesting, and that's news to a lot of people. A lot of people think squirrels nuts. But if you think about it, nuts are only available in the fall, so the squirrels have to have food year-round. The gray squirrels are not true hibernators, although they do sleep for periods of time when the weather's bad in the winter. They do go out and they will dig up their little hidden spots where they have nuts and seeds that they've stored throughout the winter. So if you're visiting the park during the winter and it's a nice sunny day and the temperatures are warming, you might actually see gray squirrels moving around in the winter time. We're going to end today's talk with one of the most common birds that you can see in the park. So Canada geese are found in the park basically spring, summer, and fall. Most of the geese that live in the park will migrate out for the winter. And that's actually a natural pattern. So the mallards, the Canada geese, and even most of the mute swans have a little bit of a southern migration, unless it's a very mild winter. So the Canada geese are a native waterfowl. You will see them not only in the water, they eat primarily plants. So they will eat some plants they find in the water, but you'll also see them up on the grass, grazing on the grass. They like to eat grass and dandelions, so you'll often see them up and around the lawn areas in the park. We do occasionally have a pair that will raise young in and around the Taunton River and the park area, so you may see the geese and their goslings of the year. They're sort of famous for their V formations. So both in the spring when they return from their southern habitat in the winter, and then before and as they're getting ready to migrate to a warmer spot for the winter, we'll see them flying in formation. And that to me is always a sign of the fall, are the V formations and the geese calling as they fly. I want to invite you to come and visit the park at your convenience. As you can see, there are things to see here and enjoy year-round. If you have any questions about animals that you're seeing in the park, please stop by the visitor center and ask one of the interpretive staff who you'll find at the front desk. Thank you for listening to me today, and I hope to see you soon at Fall River Heritage State Park.